What is the method of the Phenomenology of Spirit? How should one understand how the movements in this work are carried out? Now, I read quite a few books about Hegel and Hegelianism, and let me tell you, never have I found an actual description of method. Now, the logical method is described in a way, the whole internal dynamics, the immanent critique, so-called sublation, blah, 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 etc. But while for something like the science of logic, one can go ahead and say, yeah, all right, it makes sense, that's all that needs to be explained, there's something in the phenomenology that is generally just not explained, and definitely needs an explanation, and that is why in the hell does logic and experience from history, that is, phenomenology, come together and to make sense? So, all right, the proper way to understand this is to understand that the method of the phenomenology is a phenomenological method. It is a logic of phenomena, particularly the phenomena of knowing. Recalling the method of the abstract, negative understanding, positive speculation, and concrete, we apply this to this specific phenomena. We start with a given abstract, immediate form of knowing. This form is sense certainty, the form of knowing which is not mediated and which takes its object of knowledge to be pure sensuous content. We then think through this. We also analyze the relations of the thoughts among themselves and the relations of the objects which are thinking as well. Thus, we analyze the relation of the object of knowledge to the knower and of the thinking to the object. Also not to be forgotten is that knowing is for the purpose of truth. Thus, we must also examine the nature of the relation of truth in this form of knowing. Does the form of knowing actually provide for truth in the way it intends to? With the mere this, here, now, we find that the relation of truth doesn't work out as we would want it to. Truth, we find, keeps changing. Whenever we change what is pointed at by this, here, now, we find that truth has changed. We find that if we have multiple people going this, here, now, and pointing at different things, each means by this, here, and now something different. And yet they cannot specify within their language and concepts what is different, except by pointing to what they mean and hoping that others see it too. This is especially troublesome for temporality and the now, for the now, in being pointed out, already changes. The now which was originally meant is gone, the now which is finally pointing it out is gone. The now that finally proclaims this now is gone. It's already gone by. The now has already disappeared, and we are left inhabiting another now. So with regard to the now, what we wanted to say can never be said. For in the time that passes between us seeing what we want to point out and pointing it out as a now, the now has already gone by. So we see that the content of truth in relation to the signifier of truth, the pointing to, is always changing. It's never stable, and yet when we talk about truth, what we want to talk about is exactly that which is stable, that which does not change. So here we have, obviously, a contradiction. A self-undermining of truth by this form of knowing. Related to this is the issue of detail. The object has infinite detail in sensuous reality, but the thought which is supposed to capture this, the this, here, now, is empty of content. So the content that we want to capture and communicate cannot be communicated with this, here, now. With these mere concepts and form of knowing, we cannot share knowledge in our language, which defeats the purpose of having a form of knowing in the first place. Why speak when there is nothing to be spoken? When what is spoken is not what is known? This is the end of the negative moment. We have analyzed with the understanding how the form of knowing of sense certainty works. We see that it is a hopeless form of knowing. It can't get at what we want. It can't achieve what it claims to achieve. It cannot give us truth, and it cannot give us communicatable conceptual, comprehensible, intelligible knowledge. Now comes the speculative moment, the thinking about the thinking of the understanding. And what is it that we notice about the thinking? We notice that the thinking is mediated by a thinker and mediated by a thought, a universal. Not only that, we find that this universal, the this, here, now, is not purely abstract. When we say this, we mean it in relation to other thises. When we say now, we mean it in relation to other nows. When we say here, we mean it in relation to other heres. For example, this is an apple on this table in this house. Or, this is a cat here in my house, here in this town, here in this country. Or, now is 6 p.m., which is now on Tuesday, which is now in August, which is now in this year. Now those give specific details which sense certainty can't give. But you get the point. A this is also inside another this. It is this, inside this, outside that, and so on. Though sense certainty can't say this, it nonetheless does this. And if only it turned its eye, its thinking, upon what it does, how it thinks, it would realize that it can do much more than it actually does. Now, this is important. Here is the phenomenological trick. We end with this speculative result of sense certainty, the result that sees how sense certainty thinks, and how thinking can go beyond it, how knowing can go beyond it. The results are that we know there is a knower of what is known. Though sense certainty can't say there is an I as opposed to a this, we know that there is indeed an I as opposed to a this. And I is a this, but it's not the same as this, which is the object of knowledge for the I. We know that thought, a universal, mediates our thinking of the sensuous object. We know that this thought, this universal, is not completely empty. It is at least determinate in the way that we know it points out something specific, this as opposed to that. We also learn that thought, knowing, can fail to know the object if it does not think the object properly. The way Hegel advances then, after this, the way we get to the next form of knowing, the next form of consciousness, is to find a historical form of consciousness which humanity has experienced, which fits the bill to this result, which begins with the structure of these results. Thus, when we get to perception, what do we begin with? We begin with a form of knowing which already, in its presupposed object, in the way it knows its object, takes into account no more than these structural results. Thus, perception has the mediation of the knower, the knowing, and the known. It has a mediated universal, this mediation giving determinacy, giving definition, and also, thus, it has definition and mediation in its object. And once again, the method begins, the abstract, negative, concrete, the understanding, and speculation, etc., etc. The results of perception then provide a new structural shape, which then leads to the next candidate for a form of knowing, which shall be understanding. So, the phenomenological method is 1. Know what actual phenomenological thing you're actually studying. The method shall produce a different development if you're studying, say, history, art, knowing, or religion. 2. Take a structure of any of those and just analyze it. Think through it immanently. That is, understand it. 3. Make the speculative turn on it. Think about the structure of how you think about it, how it implicitly functions. And 4, to make an advance, just find the next historical form of what you're studying, which has a level of development which matches the level which you ended speculating with from the last. Rinse and repeat until you get to an absolute form. That's it. That is the Phenomenological method. Once again, this is Antonio Wolf. Thanks for listening.